Good morning. Good morning. I'm Julie Rowine, the president of the League of Women Voters of Concord and Carlisle for this year, and I'd like to welcome you to our first Friday of the 2019-2020 season. Our program this morning is on transportation, and I hope, well, I can see that some of us managed to transport ourselves here. I hope there isn't a giant traffic jam somewhere keeping more people away. We hold First Fridays most months on a variety of topics of local interest, and everyone is welcome. Next month, our program will be a review of the Community Preservation Act over the past 20 years almost, its purpose, its funding, and a look ahead to its future. That will be November 1st at 9:15 to 11 a.m. at the Fowler Library, which is our more usual venue. You can check our website, lwvcc.org, for details of upcoming programs, and we look forward to seeing you at many future First Fridays. I would now like to introduce Alice Kaufman, one of the organizers of this morning's program and our moderator. Thank you, Alice.
Good morning. So this morning we have a great panel of speakers here to introduce the topic of mobility and transportation. The format will be each of the presenters here has about 15 minutes to do a presentation. We'll hold a Q&A section after all the speakers are finished, because their topics will be wide-ranging, from issues at the state level to the very local, like in what's happening in Concord, our own initiatives for understanding the mobility and transport needs of our citizens and our ways to get around town, and things that we can do to address that conundrum of that first and last mile. How do people get into town, get to work, and get back to the train to get home? But we also have Lieutenant Monahan here, who is going to talk to us about how you navigate streets when you have multi-use capacity on them. Pedestrians, bikes, scooters, people, cars, dogs, whatever. So I want to make sure that you can all hear. If at any point you can't hear us, please let us know, raise your hand. I know this room has some questionable acoustics sometimes, so just let us know if you have trouble hearing. As you notice, there are snacks here. Please help yourself to some snacks. And I want to introduce Janet Rothrock. She is the co-chair of the new Environment Committee for the League of Women Voters, and she's helped put together this forum, and we have other activities planned through the year, and she'll be introducing our speakers. So what I want to do at this point is start the conversation. So, I'm sorry, did you want to do Tammy? I was just going to introduce Tammy. Okay. All right. So we have the division of responsibility, but since I'm up here, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is I know she has another appointment to get to, so we put her first on the agenda. This is Tammy Gouveia. She represents the 14th Middlesex District, serving Concord, Carlisle, Acton, and Chelmsford. I want to thank her for coming this morning. She's an expert in public health matters, has a strong interest in helping families solve their everyday problems. She is an advocate for solving transportation problems, both local and statewide. And perhaps you were able to attend her workshop held earlier this summer. I think it was one of those over 90-degree days. I don't know who was able to attend, but this is a furthering of that conversation as well. So I want to welcome Tammy to the podium this morning.
Okay, great. This microphone, yes? All right, there we go. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? Okay. Oh, I see. Oh, it's important too. Okay. Really excited to be here. So I am Tammy Gouveia, State Representative for the 14th Middlesex. I want to thank the League for hosting this forum today. Transportation is at a crisis point. You probably know that we are number 1 in terms of congestion in the country and number 9 in terms of the world. I know that we're very proud of being first in lots of ways in Massachusetts, best sports teams, number 1 in education, but being number 1 in transportation crises and issues is not, I think, a place where we would want to be number 1. So really happy to be here to explore some solutions with you and talk about some of the things that are going on up at the State House and some of the efforts that some of my colleagues and I have been working on to move things forward. So I want to thank the League for pulling this together and thank the town for supporting this effort as well. So let me give you a couple updates on things that have been going on. And there are some of these things are new because I was just sworn in January, so really had to sort of learn a little bit of the processes that make the most sense for trying to create change up in the State House. So in terms of the issues around transportation, in order to be able to be effective in advocating up at the State House, I first sat on the train platforms, 3 different train platforms, in the month of June to talk to folks about, well, what are the pain points in trying to get from point A to point B? What's the pain point with taking the commuter rail? I was sitting there when the Acton Express came by and had my hair blown over, like many other people do. So really had some of the experiences that some of you have when you're trying to take the commuter rail into Boston or into Cambridge. And the things that I heard from people were, in Acton, really appreciating we have a shuttle for satellite parking, which is really phenomenal. It costs $1 to take that shuttle, but it's getting to the point where people are turned away from it because it gets to capacity, and then people risk missing the train. I talked to a gentleman who had missed the train numerous times because he got turned away on the shuttle. If you're not on that shuttle, you can't stand on it. You have to sit because of insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's demand for this kind of satellite parking and shuttles to get from point A to point B, get people to the train station. And I think it's important for us to be taking a look at this and making more investments in this type of solution to the first mile, last mile. Some of the other things that I learned both from the town hall that Alice referenced earlier, as well as standing on the platform, are the major challenges at Alewife. Getting to Alewife, the safety factors around Alewife Garage, the condition of Alewife Garage, the fact that out of over 2,000 parking spaces, there are only 6 electric vehicle charging stations. So issue after issue about the Route 2 corridor and Alewife. So I brought these issues and some of the solutions that came up in that session to both the Speaker of the House. I had an hour-long meeting with the Speaker. Half of it was focused on transportation. And he was pretty blown away by some of the things that I was sharing about some of the work that we do with the shuttle and Crosstown Connect and Acton. Are there ways to scale that up statewide? Never really heard of such a thing. He's from Winthrop. He has a driver. I don't think he really takes public transportation. I don't think he faces some of these issues. Just like our governor doesn't get on the train, doesn't get on the T, so is not really feeling it the way that commuters across the state are really experiencing it and feeling it. So then I had a follow-up meeting with the chairman of the Transportation Committee, shared some of the same issues, some of the same ideas, and he said, wow, never heard of satellite parking before. This is something we ought to be taking a look at, because we're taking up a transportation bond bill. The hearing is on Tuesday in the State House around the governor's transportation bond bill. So this is an opportunity for us to get something in the bond bill. Bond bills have their problems, it's subject to appropriations, et cetera, but it's a way to at least elevate the conversation around some of the issues and try to get some hard dollars behind some of the studies that MassDOT, MBTA, and others have been studying, and get some dollars to support some of those projects that come out of it so that we can alleviate the pain and suffering that we experience when it comes to transportation. So in my conversation with the chairman, he's really excited to find out more about the satellite parking. He also encouraged me to work with other legislators all up and down Route 2 and who have commuters or have constituents who use Alewife. And so we had our first working group meeting that I'm chairing. We just had our first working group meeting yesterday. There were about 10 legislators. It's bicameral on both sides of Senate and the House. And we started first with identifying what are the things that we hear from our constituents, so all the way from Littleton up through Cambridge. What are the things we hear? What are the things that we experience ourselves as commuters? And what are some of the studies that have already been done or that are undergoing? And we've already started to craft out what we want to put in as a request for the transportation bond bill collectively, because if you have 10 of us who are working together under a working group that's really focused on this, it'll increase the chances that something will happen and that we will get some support from the State House as well as from the governor for some of these ideas. We are trying to get more specific information about things that when there's going to be construction on Route 2 to try to push that out, because I know that's frustrating for commuters to not know when you might be stuck in some construction traffic, and also what's going on with the garage. We're 533 parking spaces short right now because of the construction. It's supposed to be done soon. We're trying to get the hard numbers of when is that really, the hard date of when that really is going to be completed, so stay tuned on that. The other thing that we've heard pretty much since the beginning of session is that we would be taking up a transportation revenue bill. We haven't heard a whole lot about it, so this particular working group, as well as another working group that I'm also leading, is going to try to figure out when are things kind of coming out, when we can anticipate and be prepared for both the revenue bill as well as the bond bill, so that we can really have our voices heard and our priorities included in those particular vehicles for moving legislation. There's also going to be an MBTA governance bill as well that's supposed to be coming out. I don't know the details of that. Maybe Lizzie, you do. Maybe you're going to be talking about it. I don't know. But so there are a couple opportunities for us, and then also thinking about the budget next year and starting to do some preparation now for things that we might want to include in next year's budget as well, as it relates to transportation specifically. So I want to spend a quick minute talking about satellite parking, because there's a lot of interest in my colleagues in trying to figure out, are there places along Route 2 where we could have invest in some more satellite parking, and people could either take BRT, rapid bus, and maybe have some way that when you get into Alewife that the bus could keep going, and because there's a whole host of safety concerns down around Alewife with it being so multimodal and so many cars going through there. And I don't know if you read the MassDOT's report to the governor, but Alewife is, claims 2 spots out of the top 5 for being the worst congested, and it's congested 14 hours a day. And that's what I drive through when I have to drive, and most days I do have to drive into the State House, unfortunately, because the ways that the train runs is not really feasible for me in the afternoon getting back to the district for certain meetings and other appointments that I need to get back for back here. And sometimes even going into the State House, I can't make it work either, because there's not enough frequency in the late morning. So one of the things I've been doing related to that is asking a lot of questions about, well, why can't we get more trains running? And people say, well, we don't have capacity. But we do have capacity. We have enough trains because they're running every half hour or so in the morning and during the traditional rush hour. So we have to expand what we think of as rush hour now, because it's pretty much all day and not really rush hour anymore. It's rush hours. And we need to start looking at what are some options to, especially on certain parts of the line. So trying to get more specifics from folks who are transit experts, folks at MassDOT. We're trying to get a handle on forming a relationship with them and having a meeting with MassDOT to really understand what are some of the issues. Some of the things that I'm really learning is that, and even just looking at some of the documents, is the ways that MassDOT thinks about transportation. It seems like there's still such a focus on highways and roads and bridges, which we know are important. We're way behind on our state of repair on those. And it's, really important that we address those issues. But it seems like the mindset is still towards, let's make investments in roads and bridges, and, MBTA and public transportation needs to cover its own costs. And I think we need to start thinking and talking very differently about how we make investments in public transportation as a public good. That really services everybody. And we have such a booming economy. People want to be here. People want to stay here. We have great education. We just passed in the Senate $1.7 billion education funding bill. I'm sure it'll do pretty well in the House side, because there's pretty much agreement on what that bill looks like. We'll be taking that bill up in a couple weeks. So I have no doubt that people will want to continue to stay here. And it's a matter of really looking at what are the revenue options to make sure that we're investing in public transportation as a public good, because it really services, business, schools, commuters, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see. I think I've covered everything that I really want to cover in this quick presentation. I know I had 15 minutes, but I do like to try to keep it a little bit shorter so that we can engage in some conversation. So I think I'll turn it back over to Alice, and then we can kind of move on, and then maybe I can stay for some of the questions. Thank you.
People may not realize it, but there was actually a vote on where to situate the Alewife station, and I didn't vote to put it there. I voted to put it farther west. Anyway, I'd like to acknowledge our new town manager, Stephen Crane, and if you'd like to say a few words that, or not, I don't know if you want to say hello and.
He looks out loud.
Well, we welcome you here. We're very glad to have you. Okay, our first speaker is Lizzie Wyant. Okay, Lizzie joined the Metropolitan Area Planning Council in the spring of 2015 and serves as the Director of Government Affairs. She oversees MAPC's legislative priorities both at the state and federal level, including zoning reform legislation, housing production legislation, transportation funding, and energy and environmental initiatives. Ms. Wyant works closely with several state and regional coalitions and committees, including the Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance and Transportation for Massachusetts, as well as the Massachusetts Association of Regional Planning Agencies, the organization of 13 regional planning agencies in the state. Prior to joining MAPC, Ms. Wyant was the Advocacy Director of Transportation for Massachusetts, a statewide transportation coalition where she successfully advocated for more statewide funding for transportation. Prior to her time at the coalition, Ms. Wyant worked as a staff attorney at the Massachusetts Public Interest Research Group, protecting consumers through legal, grassroots, and grasstops advocacy with a focus on transportation issues and consumer affairs. Upon her graduation from law school, Ms. Wyant clerked for the Honorable Justice Susan Calkin of the Maine Supreme Judicial Court and then began practicing law in Pennsylvania. Ms. Wyant earned her bachelor's in philosophy from Carnegie Mellon and a JD from the University of Virginia Law School.
Thank you. It's really awkward to hear your own bio read out loud. I am going to stay here because I feel like it's easier for us to all sit here. I'm Lizzie Wyant. I am the Director of Government Affairs at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. We are the regional planning agency serving the 101 cities and towns of metropolitan Boston. And you are currently sitting in our favorite subregion, which is appropriately named Magic. The Minuteman Advisory, I can't remember what the G stands for. Group Interlocal Coordination, yeah. So I'm actually going to start off talking today with a little informal poll. I just want to see you kind of shout out on the first question. How much do you think we currently pay in gas tax?
3 cents.
What did I hear?
3 cents.
3 cents? 4 cents? What else? 17? What else? Someone over here. What was it? 30? Anything in the back? 12? Too little. Bravo for the gentleman with too little. So we currently pay 24 cents in gas tax. And that gas tax was actually raised in 2014. And before that, it hadn't been raised since 1991. The value of our gas tax has actually gone down over the years, and in fact, in the intervening years since we raised it by 3 cents in 2014, we've actually lost that value. So it is as though we have not raised our gas tax since 1991. And I'm putting that out there in the context of this conversation because Alice asked me to talk a little bit about sort of our mobility issues and transportation. But to me, we can't have that conversation until we talk about, like the rep said, how we fund it and how we're making our investments. So show of hands, are you willing to pay more for a better transportation system? Excellent. Oh, I see some caution. I like it. So then, for those of you who feel a little cautious about this, would you be willing to pay more if you knew that you were actually going to see a return on that investment? This is a leading question. Yes. Great. So move to the next slide. So if I leave you with nothing else, I want to leave you with this. We are traffic. We are sitting in our cars, wasting more time than any other region in the country in traffic. So we average about 50 hours a year just sitting in our cars, which you think about it is that's an entire vacation with your family, right? That's a work week. Yep, and in some regions of the state, it's 50 a month, exactly. Next slide. So this actually has a profound impact on us as a community, but then also as a region. So one of the things that's kind of worth noting is that people of color in Massachusetts actually spend more time sitting in traffic, and that's because they tend to live in areas that are less transit served. So they're actually spending more time. This is actually from a study that actually the current Secretary Pollack did back in 2013 when she was at Dukakis Center, highlighting that black bus riders spend more time waiting for the bus and in bus traffic than white bus riders. So this actually also has a profound impact on our economy, and this is actually really important because as a region, we like to be, like the rep said, number one. We like to be innovators. We like to talk about all the things we're first at in Massachusetts. And the thing about transportation is that it's actually at the core of all of those things. So a couple of years ago, the Massing Polling Group did a poll to sort of ask people if they would support more revenue for transportation, so that opening question that I asked you here. And the thing about it that's worth noting is that people really are willing to support more revenue for transportation as it relates to building our economy. And that's a really important thing to think about because it means that generally speaking, we all understand that when our transportation system works better, our economy actually works better too. And then this slide actually shows us some work that we've done at MAPC, and what it shows is that people who live essentially close to a lot of transit options have greater access to jobs, and consequently it won't be surprising if you have more transit, you're spending less time in traffic, and so you can get to those jobs faster, which also means you can get home from those jobs faster, so the whole system works better. So I want to highlight for you, as the rep indicated, there is a conversation inside the State House about how we raise revenue for transportation. And I just want to flag for you what some of those new ideas are versus what some innovative ideas are that are out there to raise money for transportation. So some big statewide sources that we're going to start talking about really soon is the Transportation Climate Initiative. That, like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, would set a region-wide cap on transportation emissions, and then we would essentially use the open market to sort of drive down our emissions. So it is a greenhouse gas emissions reduction program, but it raises a lot of money for Massachusetts and the other participating New England states. The next thing that we talk about a lot in transportation circles about how we fund transportation is thinking about how we price our roads. And this is not always popular in parts of the state where people are spending a lot of time on our roads, but all across the country and all across the world, when we have innovative tolling measures, we can actually create a reduction in congestion. There are lots of conversations using innovative tolling to engage in congestion pricing, which is where you're actually kind of drawing a line around certain parts, certain roads, around usually a metropolitan area and charging people more just to get into the city, into the urban area. At the same time, you're using all of that revenue to invest back in your public transit system so that people who don't want to drive and sit in traffic or don't want to pay more can actually take public transportation as a totally reliable option. Other conversations that are happening in the State House around the millionaire's tax. This is not a transportation facing program. It's about making our tax code more progressive, but the money raised would actually be invested in transportation. The next one on the list is actually the single most unpopular tax in the country. Is the place I refer to myself. It's the only time I get to be in the 1%, because I'm in the 1% of people who think that we should actually pay per mile, so we pay actually how much we drive, And again, reinvesting those dollars, it only works if we're reinvesting those dollars back into our transit system. And then the one that's not new, but we all know and love, and is in fact 24 cents on the gallon, is the gas tax. A lot of cities and towns across the country actually raise money for transportation locally. We're very unique in Massachusetts that most of our dollars for transportation come from the state and in some instances from the federal level. So one of the things that we would really like to see, this is a huge priority for MAPC, is allowing more of these local options to invest in transportation. So allowing cities and towns to raise more money locally and then spend those dollars on the projects that they care the most about in their communities. Some of those projects would be ones that we're going to hear about in another minute or two. So thinking a little bit about why we raise money for transportation kind of relates to all the problems we were talking about earlier. We need to raise money for transportation because we need to actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We need to change driver behavior so that we're actually having more people in fewer cars. And then we need to think about how we actually invest in public transportation. Again, on the local side, the reason we should raise money locally is because we need to be able to create these local tools that every city and town in the Commonwealth knows what they want to invest in and how they want to prioritize transportation investments, but they don't have the opportunity to raise that local money and invest it locally. And there are also opportunities to actually encourage some of the same behavior change that we would see if we did some of the big revenue raisers. So the thing I, again, kind of want to leave you with is this idea that we are the problem, that we are the ones we actually have to change our behavior, but we have to have the options available to us if we're going to actually be able to make that behavior change. So the rep kind of posed this question when she was speaking about that MassDOT has spent years really focused on highways. And the thing that I would encourage us to start thinking about is how we move towards more of a mobility-centered system, so that it's really about how we move more people with the space that we already have. And I would argue that the only way to do that is to make really significant investments in our public transit system so that everybody has more options to get around. And I think the last thing I just want you to think about is what happens if we do nothing. It is a painful process to ask the legislature to raise our taxes. It is a painful prospect for those of us to think about it, and some more than others. In particular, there are large parts of the Commonwealth where raising taxes isn't just unpopular, it's actually untenable financially. And that is a huge question that our legislators have to think about. But the flip side is that if we do nothing, we're basically left with this: really old and rusted out trains, people waiting hours and hours when one train goes down because they can't get to where they want to go, and then an actual significant safety concern. So I'm going to stop there.
Okay, on that note, next we will hear from Scott Zadakis, who is the Executive Director of Crosstown Connect Transportation Management Association. In this role, he works with public and private partners to address regional transportation needs, including access to diverse talent pools for employers, transportation choices for commuters, and improved community transportation and mobility options for the general public. Prior to joining Crosstown Connect, Scott held research associate positions at the Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy and the Massachusetts Competitive Partnership. He holds a master's degree in urban and regional policy from Northeastern University, where he focused on sustainability and transportation policy, and a bachelor's in international affairs from the University of Maine.
Thank you. So today I'm going to talk about a grant proposal that we're submitting for a shuttle in Concord. But before I get to that, I just want to kind of introduce Crosstown Connect and what we do. So we're a transportation management association, and what is that? So we're Transportation Management Association is typically something that businesses band together when they have some pain points around transportation. It's usually geographically defined. So we're a little bit different in that the towns in the area decided that they wanted to address mobility because there really wasn't a lot of public transportation options other than the commuter rail in this area. So we do work with the businesses as well, addressing their needs, but we also have a heavy focus on community transportation, which makes us a little different. As you can see from the map, we are located, Acton was kind of like the lead community that started the effort, but the towns that came together initially were Acton, Boxborough, Littleton, Maynard, and then we added Westford shortly after, and then we have expanded further. And in fact, this map is not quite up to date because we have added Carlisle recently as well. So we serve the businesses along the 495 area as well, because there's a lot of congestion there. And we're basically, the whole point of the organization is to create an interconnected, linked transportation network, get people out of their cars and reduce pollution while we're at it. And part of the problem for addressing this in this area, as you can see on the next map, which I actually pulled from a MAPC document, is there's a lot of overlapping RTAs. We have the LRTA to the north, we have the Metro West down in the Sudbury area, we have Montechusett out to the west, and we have the MBTA, which is where Concord's at. There's a couple other communities in here, but those are more just regional. So we're a public-private partnership. We're a dues-based organization. So towns that want to be members, there's a membership fee. Same goes for businesses. We have kind of a different suites of services for each of those, different types of entities. So our ongoing focus areas are daily needs trips, which can be anything from getting your hair cut to going to the Council on Aging, going shopping, anything like that. It's broadly defined, and we do that, I'll talk about it in a minute, but through centralized dispatching of several of the towns for Council on Aging vehicles and other shuttles, which enables us to really treat it as a system instead of town by town. We can use vehicles to pick people up in other towns and just use our vehicles more efficiently. A good example of that is we go to Emerson Hospital a lot, and before we started doing the centralized dispatching, we might have a van coming from 3 different towns all at the same time, and now we can pick all those people up on one van, bring them to Emerson, and now we have 2 other vans that can still serve other people. And then suburb to suburb commuting, recognizing that not everything you need is right in your town, but it might be in the next town over. And then traditional commuting, if you want to call it that, where you're going into the city. So we're trying to take advantage of first mile, I guess you'd say, to the commuter rail, and then also last mile from the commuter rail to businesses or wherever you want to go around here. I know Concord has a lot of tourists, so that could be a source of last mile for that. So employers, we work with a lot of employers in the area. A lot of them are looking, especially high-tech companies, are looking for talented workers that increasingly want to live in Boston or Somerville or Cambridge, and want to take the commuter rail. So we're working with them to create last mile shuttles. And we, with limited resources, we found some innovative ways to do that. One of which is using Council on Aging vehicles, which typically don't run during what we call commuting hours. They tend to start maybe at 8 and then end at like 4. That's not ideal, but that's where the funding is at right now. But What we found is we've taken advantage of some grants and some other opportunities to create commuter routes that go mostly from commuter rail to businesses, or from, say, satellite parking to the commuter rail. And you can see some of the routes we've developed there, one of which, the one that goes into Boxborough there, we have not finished yet, but the other ones are all finished, and those are all things that we've worked on with the Council on Aging vehicles. We do have some other fixed routes as well, including a bus that goes around the town of Acton, goes to housing, goes to shopping locations, it goes to the commuter rail. And then we've got I think it was also mentioned by Rep. Gouveia, the commuter rail shuttle, which is our highest ridership shuttle, and it goes from 2 commuter rail satellite parking lots to the commuter rail. And it really, it increases capacity, because we all know that there's not any extra parking at Acton. And it also just creates less traffic around the train station itself. And then municipalities have needs. I didn't make a slide like I did for the employers, but municipalities have similar needs. They want to reduce traffic. They want to, they need services to get people around their communities that may not have access to a car. They want to get people between their communities and other communities. And they just want their town to be more attractive to, whether it's residents or business investment or anything like that. And so the services that we provide more on the municipal town level are the centralized dispatching that I mentioned. We have the shared Council on Aging vehicles, which I also mentioned. We have the fixed route shuttles, which I also mentioned. And we also work with the town of Littleton, who does some medical trips that go a little further away than most of our services. So every other Friday they'll go to Bedford, Burlington area, and then the other 2 Fridays of the month they'll go to Boston, and they'll go to any medical facility really that people sign up for in those areas. And then the first and last mile, which I also mentioned. So now getting kind of to what I think you're probably all more interested in is the Workforce Transit Grant Program, which is what we are applying for this a shuttle in Concord for. So the Mass DOT has been funding TMAs, Transportation Management Associations like ours, to do outreach and education about, how to find carpool partners and things like that. And realizing that nowadays most people have smartphones, computers, there's all these apps out there, and there's so much information that they really wanted to turn more towards direct services like shuttles, charging stations, anything that would help further their kind of green and traffic reducing efforts. So they kind of switched gears, and they've actually dedicated some more money to these hard services. So this year, MassDOT is offering up to about $4.5 million in funding for these types of services. And these are not just for TMAs, they're for regional transit authorities, towns, employers, TMAs as well. And it's kind of like a sandbox, if you will. It's just seeing what works, seeing how the program does. It's the first year of the program, so it's kind of on a provisional basis. I should also say that the source of this funding is 2 things. It's about 1.5 is federal CMAQ money, which is Congestion Mitigation Air Quality, which is a formula fund that is allocated to each state for those goals. And then the other is from TNC, which is Transportation Network Company, like Uber or Lyft, a levy that about a year ago was put on each ride. So that's where the state funding comes from. And then so the Concord Shuttle is we're seeking about, this is a rough estimate, but roughly $145,000 for starting a pilot shuttle that will be in Concord. And it would, I'll talk about the route in a second, but there's a minimum match, and then grant proposals are supposed to show some sustainability. So over a period of years, you kind of wean off the grant program so that there's money for other startups in other places. So the reason that we thought this was a good idea, Concord is a new, not newer, it's a newer member compared to some of the other ones. So we're still trying to figure out the fit at Crosstown Connect. But one thing that we definitely saw was there was no real public transportation. So you have the commuter rail, and then you have, you know, COA, Council on Aging vehicles. You have the ride, which we're right at the edge of the ride's catchment zone. So we initially proposed a shuttle that will run from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. We may tweak that depending on what, you know, if there's no ridership at a certain hour, then we can tweak it easily. That's not a problem. And then, so the route would connect the commuter rail stations, both of them, businesses and medical facilities in West Concord. There's a lot of them there, and I'll go over that in a moment. And then also right through town, also Concord, the prison, and out to Virginia Road. So I have a couple of maps here. It was kind of to get we haven't made a flashy map yet because this is not yet a reality. But you know, if it becomes one, then we will create some flashy marketing. But in order to get the level of detail, it's broken into two maps, so I'll kind of go over the West Concord first. So I have here some, there we go. So it will basically start at West Concord Commuter Rail Station, go up Commonwealth Ave to the MCI, which has 326 employees and an average of 850 visitors per month. This was actually at the request of Rep. Gouveia that we include that, so thanks for that. And then the shuttle would go down Route 2 to Baker Ave, where there are a lot of different businesses. There's 310 Baker Ave, which has over 1,000 people with Welch's corporate headquarters, Emerson Rehab, there's startups there. There's also the Marriott Extended Stay Hotel is right there. And they would also go out to a parking lot at Baker Ave Extension, where Emerson Hospital Center for Specialty Care building is. So there's a lot of employment out there, essentially. The shuttle would then go back down Baker Ave, and eventually end up over at Emerson Hospital, and then from there it would go basically across the street to some other medical facilities over there, and then down Main Street, Thoreau Street to Concord Center Commuter Station, and then it would go Sudbury Road to Concord Center. So we're thinking, people that want to come into Concord, tourists or other people like that could easily use that to get, the train station is not directly in the middle of downtown, but you could get off and easily get downtown from there. And then there's all kinds of other historical things, as you all know, that people want to see around here. And then, so it would eventually end out at Virginia Road. We're also thinking of including the courthouse as well. It could be a good stop. We could even do that one on demand if necessary. And then out at Virginia Road, there's actually the Guild for Human Services, which has over 80 employees, and over 400 employees across the state have to go there for training. So that's a good location to get people. And then I should also mention that going the other way, we think that communities along the commuter rail line will be going to like Emerson Hospital and a lot of those medical facilities that didn't necessarily have access to them before. So the route would provide a lot of increased access, needless to say, in the area. And it would give a lot of alternative ways for people to get around. We hope it will help to decrease congestion. So next steps, just quickly, the grant closes on the 11th, so we are very close to submitting that. We've gotten good feedback so far on it, so we're hoping that it is ruled favorably upon by the committee. So they're looking at turning it around really fast, so we're supposed to get notification in November, early December. If it goes through, we'll choose a shuttle vendor, brand the service, work with businesses and institutions to find the right stop locations, make sure everything is safe and all that. Finalize the route schedule, and then choose a start date to launch the service. And then over the first year, it'll be a lot of data gathering, tweaking things. We've started a lot of shuttles like this before, so we know what we're doing in that department. Metrics reporting, and then we'll probably be developing another grant for next year, and maybe we'll, as I said, try to make it for a little less and get some more participation from the businesses that are along the route and benefiting from the service. And that's about all I have for that. Happy to take questions at the end. Well, I don't know, is it at the end or?
At the end, I think, so people can have the benefit of the full dialogue.
So is Lieutenant Monahan next?
No?
Rich Rain. Okay. Okay. Rich Rain, our Director of Public Works and Engineering, has served in the role of Director of Public Works and Engineering for the town of Concord since 2006. His public management career spans over 20 years, beginning in the town of Wellesley, Massachusetts, and Nashua, New Hampshire, where he served as Deputy Director of Public Works. Prior to that, Rich worked for over a decade for both Georgia Pacific and Weyerhaeuser?
Pretty close.
Okay. Corporation, two of the largest international forest products industry companies, where he rose to the position of branch manager?
Pardon the pun. If I knew you were reading it, Janet, I probably would have changed.
Never can tell. For a branch manager for their container board packaging and recycling business. Rich has a Bachelor of Science degree in forestry from the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a Master of Science degree in civil and environmental engineering from Northeastern University in Boston. He's also an ISA certified arborist, tree warden, and DEP licensed water treatment system operator. He works early and late and seems to be on call 24/7.
Well, thank you. Just don't know how Janet found out all that about me in such a short period of time. So thank you for inviting me here and participating in this really important topic. I've been asked to talk about the Complete Streets program, which was adopted by the Concord Select Board back in July 2018 after recommendations from the Comprehensive Long Range Planning Committee, the Planning Board, as well as the Public Works Commission. Stephen, I think what I'll do is just give you a nod when the next, so you're right on target right there. Who has ever sat in traffic in the town of Concord and wondered, where is all this traffic coming from? Everybody, right? Concord is a cut-through community. I think we all know that. There's a lot of traffic that comes through the town of Concord that it doesn't originate in Concord, it just comes through, and the only reason that they're coming through is because they're trying to avoid some of the backups on some of the main highways. And we've studied this in a lot of different ways, and most recently, we're going through a cut-through study. And who's heard of our cut-through study? We had some wiki maps online, great. Our cut-through study is really focusing on the changes that have taken place where people are no longer coming off the highways and staying on the arterial roadways. What they're doing is using different navigation software, Waze and Google Maps, to cut through some of the side streets. And it's not necessarily a speed issue. We found, based on the data gathering that we've done, that speeds are fairly within the reasonable speed limit. We have 25-mile-an-hour speed limits now in all the thickly settled areas. But the the volume is really a quality of life issue. Some of these roads are not designed to handle the amount of volume that we have. So we're going through a process right now where we worked with an engineering firm to gather data and come up with different mitigation plans, so turning restrictions, do not enter during certain AM and PM peaks. And we've met with some of the stakeholders in those neighborhoods. There's about 6 or 7 different neighborhoods that involve many different streets that we'll be looking at mitigation measures on a trial basis. So you'll start seeing some of that come about. We'll have another larger meeting to include the entire town that might be interested to roll out our progress and status, but that'll be coming up. But I've been invited here to talk about Complete Streets today. This is the team that was assembled to look at Complete Streets, and you can see it was a diverse team made up of many different people from engineering, from public works, from police, fire, planning. We also were able to hire Jacobs Engineering, who is a firm that specializes in traffic engineering and various other engineering disciplines. And through a grant program that we were successful in obtaining, we were able to bring them on board. They are expert in development of Complete Streets prioritization plans, and it was really helpful to have them on board with that $38,000 grant that we were able to receive. Okay, so you might ask, what is a complete street? Are people familiar with that terminology in the room? Complete street? Okay, great. I see a couple people nodding. A complete street is defined on this slide right here. And it really is just focusing on various multimodal type of transport, making it safe. It's not just about, like the representative said and the previous speaker, it's not just about cars and roads and bridges. It's also about transit. It's about cycling. It's about pedestrians. And that's really how we try to make it a safe experience for all, but also looking at other transit-oriented type of transportation. I have a lot of slides, so some of them I'll go through pretty quickly. This slide details the program history of Complete Streets, which really got underway in 2016 when there was a $50 million commitment made to the program for through 2022, and that commitment was made to fund some of the Complete Street improvements that people were envisioning. We're also pleased to say that another $20 million has been added and submitted, I should say, to the transportation bond bill that was submitted in July. So that was good, and that's going to continue to help fund more Complete Streets improvements. There's an equity component of this. 33% of the funding must go to communities that are at or below the median household income. Next slide. And you can see from this map that the Complete Street program continues to gain in popularity. The map on the lower portion of the screen is the Complete Streets map as it was in 2016, and the one on the larger map is a 2018 map. And Concord actually is shown there as having an approved policy, but we've made really great progress right now. Not only do we have approved policy, but we have an approved prioritization plan, and we just submitted our construction funding grant requests last week on Sunday. Actually, Friday we had our plan approved by Mass DOT, and the grant request went in on Sunday evening. So the next slide, please. This slide provides an overview of the program, and the program is made up of multiple tiers. The first tier being adoption of a Complete Street policy, and that policy is, I don't want to say it's prescribed, but there's certainly components that have to be included in the policy, and that was done, like I say, back in July of 2018 when the town adopted that through the select board. The tier 2 portion is the development of the prioritization plan. And then the tier 3 component is the eligibility, basically the application for construction funding, and each town can apply for up to $400,000 per grant round. This slide provides the details around the projects that are eligible for Complete Streets funding. You'll see they include traffic and safety, bicycle facilities, pedestrian facilities, as well as transit facilities. Next slide. And each project is scored on the criteria as shown. And this is a very competitive process. All communities that have adopted prioritization plans now are eligible for this construction funding, and we try to build the best case we can for the projects that are being submitted to fit into that into this type of categorization. Next slide. So safety benefits, the benefits, the data indicates that there are many benefits of implementing Complete Streets programs. You'll see that the installation of sidewalks and shoulders greatly decreases pedestrian conflicts, and installation of medians, road diets, and countdown timers also result in notable safety improvements. Now, I have to ask, has anyone heard of a road diet before? So a road diet is a roadway that may previously have been 4 lanes, 2 in each direction, and what they do is they eliminate 1 lane or 2 lanes, and they actually have a turning lane in the middle or a pedestrian refuge area in the middle. So basically making roadways smaller but still able to handle capacity and protect pedestrians and cyclists while adding potentially bicycling lanes. Next slide, please. So data collection, one of the first steps that we went through was data collection. Land use, we looked at some of the most popular locations that people visit in town. Schools, there includes 11 schools in the Concord system that are major transportation destinations, and these locations are evenly distributed through town. And we actually pay special attention to the schools and their locations and the connectivity. It's important because we want to encourage bicycling and walking to school because of the generation and the trip generation that each school represents. And then zoning in Concord, it's largely low-density residential. It increases in density as you approach the town centers. And then the industrial and business districts are located around Route 62, Main Street, Route 2, Baker Avenue, and Elm Street. And then historic districts, we look at projects within historic districts because we recognize that the historic districts will have another level of review, and some of the Complete Streets projects that we would propose may or may not be in keeping with some of the protection of the cultural and historic resources. So we want to be aware of where we're proposing these improvements and try to modify them to fit the various locations, including the historic district. And then open space, improvements in connectivity around open space and recreational areas are also important, and also something that we're able to get significant points toward the criteria that is scored for the construction funding. And then commuter rail, improvements around commuter rail areas are also eligible for Complete Streets improvements. We have, as we've heard, 2 commuter rail stations in Concord, one in West Concord and one in Thoreau Depot. And the 2014 ridership statistics indicate that the typical weekday inbound boardings are 541 and 592 riders for each one of those locations. So it's pretty substantial, but it also can grow if it's made easier for people to get to those stations. And I think that's what the previous speakers have spoke about. Next slide. Functional classification is another big piece that we look at. Obviously, when we look at the arterial roadways, it's important to understand, what type of road it is, what the speeds are, what type of traffic counts we have. Arterials are a higher traveled, higher speed roadway as compared to residentials, or at least that's the way they are designed. Sometimes you wonder with some of these cut-through streets, but functional classification is big. Next slide. And then we also look at actually average daily traffic count data on each of those streets as we review them when that's available to us. Next slide. So equity, I mentioned that earlier. Equity is something that the state is really emphasizing with the 33% rule. And when we look in Concord, there are no minority income or English isolation areas in Concord according to the 2010 census. However, the Concord Housing Authority does indicate that 1 in 5 households do qualify for low income. CPW also maintains what we call the PROWAG, which is the Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines, and that's something that we've had in place for several years now. We went through a process to adopt and modify our PROWAG and the transition plan, and worked with the Disability Commission and had conversations with them to make sure that we were on the same page. So that's helpful because the ADA compliance goes hand in hand with the Complete Streets projects. So we're always incorporating ADA in any of the Complete Streets work that we do. Next slide. Where we are, crash data. So crash data for the years 2014 through 2016 was obtained from Mass DOT, and it showed there was a total of 1,130 motor vehicle crashes during this time period. 268 of those crashes involved injuries. And the important thing to note from this slide, which is a really telling slide, is that although the number of incidents for vehicle crashes is much higher than cyclists or pedestrians, 92 and 81% of the bicycling and pedestrian crashes involved injuries, as compared to 22% in vehicle crashes. So it's very important to note that, because although the number is small, the incidence of injury is much higher. This map shows the locations of the 21 crashes that occurred between 2014 and 2016. These are bicycle crashes, and they're generally clustered around the downtown area. And the walking crashes were 13 pedestrian walking crashes. And it's interesting to note that there's sidewalks located at each one of these locations, except for the crash on Route 2A by the Acton Town Line. And all but one of these crashes did involve an injury. So as we get this data and we understand it, we're able to program some of this prioritization plan, develop around some of these components. Next slide. So I mentioned that the projects were identified based on the criteria developed by Mass DOT for Complete Streets program, and then this criteria that you see on the screen helped drive the development of the prioritization plan from the staff that was assembled. Next slide. The Complete Streets program that we developed had a very strong public outreach, public inclusion phase, where we developed an online tool. Let me make sure you're on the right slide. Yep, you're perfect, Stephen. This is a wiki map. Did anyone participate in the wiki map? Perfect, that's great. Thank you for doing that. It helped us quite a bit. The wiki map allowed people to actually put comments on a map, and then those comments fed different comments from others. So we were able to take all that data and distill it down and track those comments, be it 30 seconds. All right, I might go a little over, but I'll go as quickly as I can. So we're able to get those comments and drive our development of the prioritization plan. Next slide. We also had two public meetings and workshops. One was at the beginning of the process, and the next one was after the prioritization plan was developed and it was out for public comment. We had another meeting hosted by the Public Works Commission, and we're happy to report we received over 379 comments from residents in Concord, and our engineering group that we worked with, Jacobs, indicated that this was one of the most actively engaged communities in the development of the Complete Streets program that they've done, and I think they've done 18 or 20 of them, so that was great news. So all this led to, next slide, sorry. All this led to the prioritization plan, which is now eligible for Tier 3 funding. I apologize for the small print, but we're going to go to these next slides. Yep, so this is, I just have a couple more slides, and I'll call it at the end. So this slide shows the year one, project one. This is a project that includes major pedestrian improvements on Hubbard Street, and it includes sidewalks, ADA compliant ramps, curbing, curb extensions, ADA improvements. This residential roadway provides access to parks, to schools, to the public library, to the arts center, and it scores very high because of the population that it serves and the buildings that it serves. It's a street that sees moderate to high traffic at times, has stone dust sidewalks, and it makes it very difficult for people to navigate on stone dust sidewalks, especially in the spring and in the winter. It makes it difficult for us to upkeep them too, and from winter maintenance standpoint. The year one project 2 is improvements to the intersections off of Com Ave near Bradford and Beharrell Street in particular. We do have some off-site developer contributions from the Oak Tree Development, 50 Beharrell Street, that is available to us, that we will leverage that funding and our Complete Streets funding if we're successful, and make that a better pedestrian experience in that area, as well as deal with some of the traffic calming. And it includes curb ramps, bump outs, sidewalks, and traffic calming. Please. And then year one, project 3 is the final year one project, and we're requesting grant funding. And I got to say that the Conantum area and the neighborhood came out in strong support of improvements on a crosswalk on Sudbury Road over by Oxbow, 7 Star Lane, Garfield area. There's some sightline issues there, some speed issues, and we agreed, and in fact, because of the strong support that they showed, we rose this up in priority into the 5-year plan, in fact, into the year one, where we'll be adding a rapid rectangular flashing beacon, curb ramps, advanced warning signs, and a crosswalk. I'll go quickly on the next 2. Year 2 are improvements on Main Street and Baker Avenue. I think everybody that's driven that intersection knows that it's confusing, knows that there's alignment issues, and we'll try to make that less confusing and also lessen the travel distance between the curb ramps to make that a better experience for pedestrians. And then the last project we have, year 3, project 1, is a project that will bring connectivity from Magnolia Street, but really the downtown area, all the way to the new high school, and we're proposing a sidewalk extension in that area that will also go hand in hand with a debt authorization that's programmed in our capital plan. So our next steps that we have are the finalization of the Complete Streets prioritization report that we'll be submitting over the next month to Mass DOT, and then we'll be responding to any questions that come up from Mass DOT on our construction funding request. So sorry for going over. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. Thank you.
Okay, now we will hear from Lieutenant Monahan. Lieutenant Kevin Monahan is someone many of you may already know. He's been with the Concord Police Department for 20 years. He's risen through the ranks through the years and was promoted to lieutenant this last spring. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Nice job, Kevin.
Lieutenant Monahan knew when he was in high school that he wanted to be a police officer. He's the first in his family to choose this line of work. He has a BA and an MA in criminal justice from Salem State University and Western New England College. When he's not working, he enjoys boating on Lake Winnipesaukee and skiing.
Good morning, everybody. Excuse me, I have a cold, so I apologize for my voice. But on behalf of Chief O'Connor, I would like to thank you for inviting us to participate in this forum. Traffic's a very important issue for the residents of town, and especially for the police department. It's probably, we log 33,000 calls a year, and out of those, I'd say the highest priority is traffic-related calls, whether it's traffic, motor vehicle stops, crashes, or traffic enforcement. So it's one of our highest priorities we deal with on a regular basis on every shift. We have a safety inspector who actually, his primary responsibilities is the liaison for traffic-related issues, deals with the public, taking complaints, whether it's speed, stop signs, crosswalks, things of that nature. Excuse me. And the one that establishes what we have is directed patrols, which is he puts out specific traffic enforcement for certain areas of town where we receive complaints from residents to try to educate and enforce the laws and advise motorists, condition motorists, of how they should operate their motor vehicle safely and efficiently. Safety is our number one priority for the department, to get people from point A to point B. It would be nice to be more efficient with traffic, less congestion, but safety is our number one rule. So that's where we stand on that. I was asked to speak about the bicycle laws and pedestrian laws. There's some confusion of what the rights are for bicyclists. So that's probably the biggest issue over the last 20 years. There's a lot more bicycles using to commute to and from work, to and from school, and with the addition of the rail trail, will be even increasing as years go by. Excuse me. So just a few rules that people may or may not be aware of. The bicyclists must obey all the same traffic laws as motorists, including stopping at red lights and stop signs, and riding on the right side of the road, and yielding to pedestrians in the crosswalks. Those are issues we try to address through education. A lot of times we stop in the center of town, the bicyclists stop and educate them on how to properly, the rules of the road. And we also sit with the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and other groups at a young age to try to give them the education prior to. The enforcement aspect of it, by law, you can give a $20 fine for any violation of the law. If they run a stop sign, it's a $20 fine, which is, it's very rare. Usually it's just mostly education. There is a side note that if they refuse to identify themselves, it is arrestable. Right, I've never seen it happen, and hopefully I never do. It's kind of a weak law, because once they do identify themselves, you have to let them go, so. Not sure what the point of it is, but I don't create the laws, I just enforce them. So bicyclists, unlike the motorists, they may pass on the right-hand side of the roadway. They can pass on the right side of cars, so it's imperative to keep an extra eye out for bicyclists. They are supposed to use hand signals if possible. For safety reasons, if they have to keep both hands on their on the handlebars for safety, then they don't have to use hand signals to turn, but they're supposed to. One of the biggest misconceptions of bicycles, they may ride two abreast on the roadway. Most people, it used to be single file until maybe 8 or 10 years ago, and we get a lot of complaints and calls from at the station that there's a group of bicyclists riding down the road and I can't pass them. But legally they can ride two abreast. No child under the age of 1 may be carried on a bicycle. Passengers between 1 and 4 years of age weighing 40 pounds or less must be carried in a bay seat. And riders 16 years or younger must wear a helmet. When riding at night, all bicyclists must use a white light on the front, which is visible at 500 feet, and have a red light or a reflector on the rear of the bicycle visible from 600 feet. All crashes must be reported to the police if there is personal injury or the damage exceeds $100. And as Rich said earlier, that if we have a bicycle crash, usually there's injuries. So unfortunately, that's the case. Bicycles may be used on all roadways except limited access highways. So we get calls, people driving their bikes down Route 2. Dumb, yes. Illegal, unfortunately, no. It's not. No. So take your life in your own hands. Sometimes driving down there is dangerous, never mind riding a bike. So bicyclists may use any part of the roadway as needed to pass another bicycle on the left, to stay 4 feet away from a parked car or to avoid a pothole or other road hazard. Those are primarily the bicycle laws that I wanted to cover. The pedestrian laws, pedestrians should never enter a road, whether it's a crosswalk or not, without first obviously looking. With the electric cars, as quiet as they are now, sometimes you can't hear things. The old days, you could hear the car coming. Those days are long over. You should also keep an eye out for bicyclists coming down, as well as they're quiet. So laws for motorists. Motorists must yield to pedestrians in a crosswalk if they're in their lane or within 10 feet of their lane. So that means if they're coming into your lane, you have to stop, and if they're halfway across the road into your direction within 10 feet of the center line, they have the right of way and you have to yield to them. You may never block a crosswalk. And one of the things that people aren't aware of, in my experience, is you may not open a car door into a pedestrian or bicyclist. If you open your door and you hit somebody, then you're at fault. It's not the pedestrian or the bicyclist's fault. They have the right of way. So you have to be obviously very clear when you're cautious when you're opening your door, especially tight roads like Com Ave, Thoreau Street, Main Street, things like that with this high congestion. Motorists, when turning left or right, must yield to bicyclists and pedestrians. You must leave a safe distance to turn after you pass a bicyclist. If they're coming in the opposite direction, they have the right of way. And then it's illegal to use unreasonable use of the horn when you're passing a bike or pedestrian. Obviously, it's the law. It's also common sense too, which goes a long way. So, kind of the pecking order is pedestrians have the right of way over bicyclists. Bicyclists have the right of way over motor vehicles. Is an easy way to look at it. And with the addition of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail opening up, we have a lot more bikes going to be out on the road. A couple of months ago, we started patrolling with our bike officers, and we even have our motorcycles go down at a very slow speed to just kind of monitor the area, especially prior to it opening up. But we'll continue to do that just to keep the trails safe. At the West Concord Junction Park, people are encouraged to get off and walk their bikes across the street. You're not supposed to ride across the street. It's very dangerous, especially in that intersection. The rail trail etiquette: users should stay to the right side of the trail. They must stop at all stop signs. Cyclists should slow down for pedestrians and be willing to ride behind them without following too close, and only pass when the path is clear and there's no oncoming traffic. Cyclists should not follow other bicycles closely and leave at least 6 feet of space. And you should be given a verbal alert when you're passing somebody. It's my understanding that dogs are allowed on the rail trail. You just have to have them on a leash no longer than 6 feet, is my understanding. So that's essentially the laws I want to just kind of go over. And I know people had a lot of questions, so I can just answer specific questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that's it for our speakers, and now it's time for you. I do have one comment to read, but I think is it not on? Sorry. So this is the time for questions and answers, and either I can start, or if you've got a burning question, you can, let's see, grab a microphone. I think you can come up and use that microphone. Yeah.
Hi, Nick Pappas, 300 Virginia Road. For Scott, just one thing I want to point out. About a mile past where you're stopping on Virginia Road, there's an MBTA bus stop that goes through Alewife. And right now, it is crazy to walk from my house on Virginia Road up there because there are no sidewalks, the road is narrow. A bicyclist was killed in that stretch of road in 2016. I'd strongly encourage you to consider the possibility of extending it a bit to that point. Second, for Scott, data collection. Are you going to be collecting data on embarkations and disembarkations so that we know where people are going, so that you have good data for making decisions afterwards?
Yes, we will be. The way we do ridership is, on and off at each stop, so we will be able to track that. In terms of the MBTA stop, thank you for the feedback. The route is not final yet. I was actually remiss earlier. I should have given credit where credit was due, but a lot of this route has been developed by the Concord Planning Department, who has much better knowledge of the area than I do. But that being said, it's an iterative process, and we will continue to tweak the route. And if that seems to be a good place to end it, if we're able to do that. So, thank you.
Jane? Is this being recorded? I think you need to be at a microphone.
Jane Hodgson, I'm the select board in Concord. This is as much as for me as a resident in town as anything. I noticed, first of all, thank you all. This is great. Thank you for doing this. This is an exciting next step in our transportation discussion in town, and one that will continue clearly. I'm both a bicyclist and a pedestrian, so thank you for all those things.
Do I need to repeat that question? I'll take a piece of it. The question is, what are we doing to address the traffic congestion on Route 62?
Yeah, so my office is at the mill in Maynard, and I come out from Cambridge, so I drive that all the time. So, I mean, I think it was really about trying to hit the particular locations as far as healthcare facilities, and I also getting out to Concord MCI and you know, the other businesses out there. And, you know, just trying to get to as many of them as possible. And like I said, this isn't the final route, but so was the question that you would like to see the route go along 62 further? Like basically instead of cutting around it? Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually, I've been talking with people about how we could possibly utilize some area, like some of that parking, make some more parking near the bus depot and possibly do a park and ride. We're definitely going to be looking at Route 62 into West Concord from Maynard, as there's going to be a new international school. There's going to be new development, apartment developments. There's going to be all kinds of stuff happening over there, and so that will probably be our next focus. We definitely take things one thing at a time because of funding. We can't. We wish we could do everything all at once, but I would say that's probably where we're going to be focusing a lot of our energy in the coming year or so. Yeah.
More to come, I think, on Route 62 in discussion. A lot of hands are up. How about starting on the far end, Jean? If you want to, can we get a microphone?
No, we've got one here now.
Excellent. Great, thank you.
Not yet? Okay, okay. So I'd like to just sort of add on to Jane's comments in terms of Route 62. I realize there's some planned development farther along Route 62. However, right now, you've missed a huge cluster of businesses and residences that are on Forest Ridge Road, which is right off of 62. There's Minuteman Arc, there's Black Birch 1, Black Birch 2, Riverbend, and the Muse, as well as the Thoreau Club. And just beyond that is a major shopping area with the only grocery store that reasonably serves West Concord. I see people walking down 62 all the time with bags of groceries or bags from Rite Aid, where they've gone down there to shop and walked home. I think you've really missed a huge cluster. There would be more ridership likely from that cluster than there might be from MCI. Not that I don't think that's a good idea, but I really urge you to expand that now, not be thinking about it maybe sometime in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. One of the challenges is people will not ride the shuttle if it takes too long to get from one end to the other. I see one of the planners wants to say something as well, but we're trying to keep it as close to an hour. We're starting with one vehicle. We would like to expand that in the future, but with one vehicle, if you do much more than an hour, the data shows people just won't ride it. But like I said, that area, we would love to hit the Muse, we'd love to hit the shopping center, and we will be aiming to do so in the future. Do you want to add something,
Can
Marcia?
I make a follow-up comment on that? Just in terms of your vehicles, I'm not sure if you're planning on doing anything on the weekends, but let me take off and put on my other hat other than resident as the head of Minuteman ARC. We have vehicles that are not heavily used at night, on the weekends, and we would be happy to try to work on something either with you or with the town where those vehicles could be used by citizens.
We would love to explore that. We're always looking for vehicles, and so yeah, I'd love to look at that.
I think we just found a new partner. I just wanted to add that the purpose of the grant that we're seeking is workforce housing. And so trying to get commuters who are coming out to get to businesses is the intention of this initial loop. The success of this loop allows us to look and expand beyond that. So I think that's why it's a little narrow focused right now. We want to encourage that, get that off the ground, and then continue from there. So I think
That's a good
Scott
point.
talked about starting small, getting success, and building on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Salma? Oh,
I'm just doing my Phil Donahue impersonation.
okay. Sure.
Question for Rich Reagan. You talk about complete streets. Have you ever considered pedestrian-only areas like in Concord Center or the center of West Concord? There are towns that have done this, where there was huge resistance from the businesses, and now they love it.
So the question is about whether we've considered pedestrian-only streets in some of the more popular downtown areas of Concord and West Concord.
Right. We haven't considered that as part of the development of the prioritization plan, but we have thought about that. Is there either on a basis of, like they do down in Cambridge, Memorial Drive is closed on Sundays during the summer for people to exercise and to do various things. That might be something that if the town supported that, it could possibly happen, but it wasn't part of the prioritization plan, no.
So I'd like to introduce a new area of conversation to the question and answer here, because this is a little different than what we're hearing from this group, and I want to make sure we don't miss the opportunity for a large part of the audience to hear it. This is a letter that was received by the Select Board and directly from the writer, Sue Felshen, who's unable to be here today. And she says, she's asking that we formally support the full transformation alternative for the state's rail vision planning process for the future of the MBTA commuter rail. Hopefully one of the panelists are going to be able to speak to this. MBTA rail vision, it wasn't that better? Okay. The MBTA rail vision outlines 7 alternatives. Options range from more of the same infrequent, polluting heavy diesel to frequent low-carbon, fumeless, self-propelled electric trains. And options vary among high-frequency service just inside Route 128 and just at, quote, key stations, which don't include either of Concord's stations, or at every station. Alternative 6 is called the full transformation. It's the only alternative that would provide Concord with electrified service every 15 minutes throughout most of the day. It is the only alternative that would fully electrify the commuter rail system for a carbon-free future once the electric grid is fully electric. And that would emit no fossil fuel pollution along the train lines. The full transformation alternative has the highest capital cost, but would more than pay Massachusetts back in lower operating costs, huge side benefits of more frequent service, reduced carbon footprint, lower healthcare costs due to less pollution, and reduced noise, and much more. The path of least resistance for the MBTA is to choose the worst alternative and buy new heavy diesel to replace the current heavy diesel, locking us into many more decades of climate-changing, polluting service that puffs and thunders through our town, maybe a little more frequently than it currently does. We need to push the state in every way we can to choose the full transformation alternative for the sake of Concord, the whole MBTA region, and the world. I grant you, even if the MBTA does the right thing and chooses the full transformation alternative, the Fitchburg line would probably be close to the last line to get electrified. We could see some minor earlier improvements as other lines get electrified and other diesel equipment can be shifted around the systems. With commitment and funding, it would be possible to convert the entire system in a decade. Realistically, it's likely to take longer, but if we don't start, it'll never happen. If it would be helpful to you, she's offering advice and to work with us, tells us how to submit our comments to the rail trail plan, the rail vision plan. And so I'm hoping somebody here is knowledgeable about rail vision to talk about the future of rail in Massachusetts.
I'm happy to take that.
Great.
So I'm happy to. So the Rail Vision process is currently underway, and they have rolled out, I think, 3 of the 6 alternatives, more of a detailed plan on 3 of the 6 alternatives. And I think they are expecting to roll out the final 3 alternatives, a more detailed version, by next Friday. That's the date I have in my head, and then it'll be open for public comment. The MBTA has rolled out sort of an overview of each of the 6, and the summary that you just heard is just a really excellent description of sort of the range of options that are out there. And the biggest thing to know is that on one end, it's sort of making investments, but in the system that we have, sort of status quo, and then the very expensive option at the other end, but also the most would realize the biggest transformational change in our commuter rail system and kind of moving us more towards a regional rail system, the likes of which we see all over the country and all over Europe for many, many, many years, is option 6, which again is the most expensive option, but it would move us to full electrification and more of a regional rail system. I would encourage all of you to actually become more engaged in that rail vision process. We at MAPC have started to convene a lot of the municipal leaders from around our region and actually a little bit beyond our region. So we serve 101 cities and towns, but the full MBTA system with all of commuter rail serves 164 cities and towns. And then there are a number of communities that are sort of adjacent to commuter rail where their residents are actually using a ton of commuter rail. So at the end of the day, you end up getting like half of the state that is touched in some way by the commuter rail system and the accompanying service that goes along with having commuter rail. And the interesting thing is, in Massachusetts, we really tend to see ourselves as very siloed. So like the issues that are happening in Concord are not the same as those happening in Hopedale or in New Bedford. But when it comes to transportation, particularly regionalization of transportation, that is just not the case. And so we've brought a bunch of these municipal leaders together, and I expect that they will take a position on the rail vision that is out there. And I'd be surprised if they say, yes, we don't actually want more service in our communities. That's just not how municipal leaders continue in their jobs. So I expect that, again, that coalition will move towards that full vision of realizing a regional rail system. And then I think the question of electrification, the biggest challenge with it is the price tag. But again, if we're thinking about the longevity and the greenhouse gas emissions that we know we have to reduce from our transportation sector, it's really the only way to go. So it is my hope that we move towards a way to finance the option 6, to move towards a regional rail system with a full electrification. But you should all continue to be involved in that process. It's ongoing and really important.
I'd just like to add one thing. Under some of the scenarios where there's what they call key stations. The key station in this area would be Littleton 495, which I think also you'd have to make some serious infrastructure investments there as well. So I just would encourage anyone that does make comment to, particularly anyone further out on the line, that, you know, you'd probably want to be advocating for more. Well, it's great to have these hubs. I think that for each community, it would be better to have more consistent service throughout the day. Second of all, I think just like most of the other parts of the transportation sector, everything's going electric sometimes, so we should start that process now.
Great, thank you. Of somebody we haven't heard from, if that's okay. There was a comment back there. Great. I have a very able hand over here helping me out.
Thank you. First, I want to commend you for this brochure you put out. I don't know if it's new or if it's been around for a while, but the pedestrian and bicycle advisory, it's an excellent guideline. The thing I'd like to add to that is I'm very much a bicycle and trails advocate. I think some of the things we have to think about is sharing the sidewalks. Sidewalks are kind of narrow, but I think people don't realize the rules around bicycles and pedestrians on the sidewalk. If you're a road biker, that's one thing. If you're a gray-haired bicyclist or a 10-year-old student, you're not going to ride on the street in most of these streets. So you're going to share the sidewalk. We should have some little guideline on that. The other part of that is share the trails, which the Trails Committee is working on guidelines for that, and this back page is excellent for that. So I thank you for those rail trail etiquette. And the last thing I just want to mention is we need to keep ourselves open to the new technologies that's coming out. We have e-bikes, e-scooters, bike rentals, that sort of thing. And we need to think about how we're going to accommodate those. But that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I want to make sure everyone knows that on the table back there are copies of the flyer for safe bicycling rules for Concord.
And I just want to say that you can ride a bicycle on a sidewalk as long as you yield to pedestrians, as long as you're not in a downtown business district area. You cannot ride a bicycle on the sidewalk in a downtown business district area. So
Can I
just so
just
you're aware of it.
offer one other comment on that? Just to your point about new technology, that is a real issue that I'd say a lot of cities and towns are trying to address. It's particularly true with scooters and thinking about how scooters work on sidewalks versus on the road. We have to change the state law to actually allow scooters to be street legal in Massachusetts, but we are working on that, and I think it will happen this legislative session. But obviously, scooters are not like the only technology that's out there. I spend a lot of time downtown. You see people actually moving down the street on these like really funky electric unicycle things. I don't know, like maybe they control it with like their elbow or their ear, I'm not sure, but it's all coming, and it's all ways of actually moving towards a more mobility system. And so I think you're right to raise that as an issue, that we have to think about how we share our roads and our sidewalks and our other public right-of-ways. And then the one other piece about that is, it often feels very terrifying to a lot of people, is that at some point we will also have autonomous vehicles, and they are learning how to share the road with humans because they are robots. And so it will affect how we all get around. And I think the more that we think about our road spaces and our mobility spaces as places that we share, the more adaptable we'll be when that new technology comes online and we're not just reacting to it.
A lot of hands up. How about starting closest to you, since you've got the microphone, Stephen?
I'm handing out the microphone, but I'm not choosing the questioners, just so, because everybody's looking at me, and I'm like, oh no, look at her.
Start on the far left.
I just wanted to make a comment about riding on the sidewalk. There was a national transportation study a few years ago that actually showed that it was more dangerous to ride on the sidewalks. For little kids going really slowly, it's a good thing, but cars pull out of their driveways and they stop at the road. They don't stop at the sidewalk. So, I'm a white-haired bicyclist and I ride in the road.
Thank you. Come down front, maybe, since you're closest. Yep. Thank you.
Hi, Pamela Dritt. I was grateful for that letter. I want to urge all of you wonderful people to please think and educate in economic terms. These infrastructure changes, the initial cost is far from the total cost of each change. We need to look at them in terms of the return on the investment over the long-term time. And diesel infrastructure improvements will cost more over time. The cost increases. The electrical infrastructure improvements may be more costly to start with, but their return not only pays for them, it makes reverberating cost benefits for the entire community. And so please, when you tell the people, look at the difference in costs, include always how much it will save us in the future. Because once we've spent fossil fuel infrastructure money, we have to use it. And that will hurt us financially.
How about if we keep coming down this way? I'll grab it from you and pass it back to you and get past the middle lane. Where was it?
I had a couple of questions related to bicycling. I did not see in the Complete Streets program any provision for bike lanes, and I was at a symposium last winter, Harvard Business School, and I guess mainly. But anyway, they were saying that dedicated bike lanes rise biking participation from roughly 10% to 50%. So if people are separated from traffic, they feel safe, they'll use them. Also, these could potentially be used, I imagine, for scooters, and they would be especially important near schools, down in the high school, Alcott school area, and in West Concord. And at the very least, I don't see why Concord can't put up some signs that say bikes can be two abreast. They have those signs up in Lincoln, and maybe a sign that says cars yield to bikes, because a 2,000-pound vehicle is much safer than, somebody who's not protected. And as you point out, accidents with bikes and pedestrians usually result in injury, whereas cars don't. So why can we not make more provision right now for bikes?
It's a great point, and it's a conversation I've had with Nick Pappas after our first public hearing. Can everybody hear me? This sounds really loud. Okay. Okay, great. After our first public hearing that we had on the Complete Streets, that was another comment that was raised about different types of accommodations for cyclists. And we looked at that and thought that there would be a lot of value in being able to look at the entire town holistically and find out where, first of all, look at our existing condition, and then look at where we can make improvements, either by sharrows or dedicated bike lanes or even just signage. And we thought, as I said earlier when we were going through the prioritization plan, just because you don't see that on the prioritization plan doesn't mean that there's not another initiative in the works. And that's something that when Nick and I talked with the engineers from Jacobs, we thought that would be a great idea to come up with a scope and an analysis of where we could actually put bike lanes, sharrows, or signage. Obviously, bike lanes, you have some limitations on what you can do based on the roadway width and right-of-way available. But sharrows, they have some limitations based on speed, on the posted speed of a roadway. But you could do certainly awareness with signage. So that's going to be something that we engage Jacobs Engineering to look at and do a comprehensive analysis of the town where it makes sense to do these types of changes. So great point, Janet.
Hi, Gary Kleiman, Central Street in West Concord, and chair of the StarMet Reuse Committee for the Superfund site on the border with Acton and Maynard. Two-part question for Scott. question is, can you remind us or explain to us what are the key factors that would enable expansion potential beyond, I totally agree that the key first step is demonstrate success with the spine between West Concord Village and Concord Center, even as far as Virginia Road is great. But if we want to expand in the future, what are the factors that will affect that? Is it all ridership, or is it business contributions, or are there other factors that will affect our ability to expand? Second part is for Lizzie. To what extent are they linking revenue questions like the Transportation Climate Initiative or the Millionaire's Tax to the rail, Vision Rail 2050 or whatever it's called? Thank you.
In terms of expansion, I think proof of concept with the first leg, if you want to call it that, it will be highly based on ridership, but also, funding as far as getting private contributions, things like that. I think that the best way that we could extend the route without having to make like stops where people get off and get on a new bus would be to add vehicles, so you had several of them, and then you could keep the you could keep time between when a vehicle came by shorter. That being said, no, I guess, it just depends like how long people want to be on the vehicle. But if somebody wants to go to, say, Bedford from Maynard, then that would be great. So I think mainly it's, we had to get a grant just to get this going. So I think it's really comes down to the financials of what the participation is.
So on your question about dedicating dollars, this is actually a really tricky question in terms of transportation financing. Part of that is because we actually made it a little bit trickier when we consolidated all of our different transportation agencies into one Massachusetts Department of Transportation plus the quasi-public of the MBTA. So when we did that, when that consolidation happened, which was really actually important because it was just, we were like the only state in the country that didn't have a DOT. We had like all these different independent agencies. So when that consolidation happened, we created these two funds for the way that dollars come into Massachusetts. There's the Massachusetts Transportation Trust Fund and the Commonwealth Transportation Fund. And you do not need to know what they do because it is like the spider map of how the money comes in and how the money comes out is terribly confusing, and I spend all of my time doing this work. But the reason that it's actually hard to specifically dedicate dollars is because money comes in from a number of different sources, goes into those two pots, and then goes out to a number of different investments. So, but one of the things that's really hard is that there's this really strong narrative that's out there right now, largely coming from the administration, that we don't need any more money in our transportation system, and we couldn't spend more money if we actually got more money in. And the reason that the administration will say that we don't actually need more dollars is because based on the transportation system that we have today and what we need to actually maintain that system, we have enough money to pay for it right now. But the problem is that the transportation system that we have today is not the transportation system that we want today. And so we have to actually think about how we bring more dollars in. And part of the reason why it's important for someone like me to talk to people like you is to help make that case, to actually say we need more of these dollars in because we actually need to invest in things like Rail Vision and Complete Streets and thinking about all of these new innovative technologies that are going to be coming online. But actually dedicating the dollars inside legislation is actually a difficult thing to do. But that said, I'd say a lot of advocates are actually talking about that and sort of talking about how we need to have kind of an updated rail system. We need to think about the economic benefits of that like we make these small investments today and the return on that investment is really high, both from an economic perspective, but also from a public health perspective. We're just not as healthy when we live really far away from where we want to go. And making that case to the legislature that the return on the investment is really important. But that is actually one of the things that's up to all of you. That is the thing that we need you to do to bring that message back to your elected leaders. And Rep. Gouvet is already there, so you can talk to all the other ones.
Hi, if you don't mind, I want to face the League of Women Voters rather than the speakers, and members of the Select Board who are here. I'm Nick Pappas. I worked on the long-range plan with Gary Kleiman and others, and I took on for myself the task of working on transportation. There was no one else who knew anything about it, who had any responsibility for it. And that's a sad reflection of the town, frankly. More than 10 years ago, the previous long-range plan called for focus on transportation. It never happened. Okay, this long-range plan more clearly calls for a focus on transportation. It's been over a year since that plan was published. There is no focus on transportation yet. We need a focus on transportation. I don't really at the moment care whether that's a person, a department, a function, or a working group, but we need to get going on transportation. I attended a MassDOT conference where I was pleased to hear they actually are trying to get beyond being the Mass Highway Department. And I heard a goal stated, which was, because of the growth of population and the economy in Massachusetts, we need to move more people in fewer vehicles. I believe that is the correct goal for transportation. These programs that were talked about today are great, but everything we do in the future needs to be evaluated in a goal through a lens like that. For instance, the town has started an economic vitality group. Anything we do in that area is going to affect transportation and is likely to increase the amount of transportation. They have to look at their goals in terms of what that effect is going to be and whether or not it decreases the number of people moving in vehicles, whatever I just said. Anyway, and the final thing is data. We do not have information on which we can make good decisions right now. Collecting information, data, so that we can make decisions is paramount. So, members of the League of Women Voters, please influence.
Did you want to come up? I guess you can use that one.
So I asked if I could just make a few comments briefly. I'm Stephen Cranigan, Town Manager, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of my background on this. I first started working in transportation planning almost 25 years ago. I started my career on Capitol Hill, and I actually worked for a boutique lobbying firm that represented largely Northeast state departments of transportation on the reauthorization of what was then ICE-T, which they called T21 at the time, and then it was SAFE-T and a bunch of other. And then I think they just stopped doing authorization bills, and everything got done in omnibus budget bills at the federal level, which is so good. And I think one of the things I'm struck by in listening to this dialogue, first of all, thank you to the panelists. Great job, great presentations, very informative for me. And Nick, to your point, there's always a focus on transportation, but the issues are some local, regional, statewide, macro-regional, and nationwide. And the solutions for those issues and the resources from them are kind of inversely proportional, where we feel the most impacts locally and the least amount of resource to deal with them are at the local level. And so what I'm encouraged by here is the focus on regional cooperation, and I think Crosstown Connect is an excellent program that we should try and build upon. But the issues of commuter rail, I mean, I think that even though it's expensive, it's a pretty high ROI in terms of either getting people off the road or improving safety. But I think people just need to keep it in perspective. 25 years ago, I heard all the same stuff. All the same problems, all the same issues, reduce vehicle trips, improve non-fossil fuel. I mean, and I think that the big thing in the keep it in perspective, and I want to kind of end on a sort of positive note, is it's somewhat frustrating to hear the same things I heard 25 years ago, but at the same time, I had a pretty clear picture of what our intermodality and multimodality was when I was lobbying on this big federal legislation. And I can see now that a lot of the things they talked about doing, a lot of the goals that were set forth in that bill and that law have largely honestly been realized, but are much better than they were back then. It just takes a lot of money and a lot of time. But I think conversations like this are really important, and a lot of big transportation initiatives start off with little pilot projects and little ideas. And so I just really thank the League of Women Voters for putting together a great panel and a great program. And and thank the residents of Concord for being engaged and informed on these issues. And I look forward to working with you all on them. Thanks.
Can I just make one point on that? So on the manager's point, I always joke that there's lots of job security when you work in transportation advocacy because you just like never fix it. But you know, the thing I think that's new, just to kind of build on that hopeful note, is that so I've been doing this work for about 11 years, and I think the thing that I have seen recently, and it's really just in the past couple of years, is that for the first time, people are actually starting to talk about transportation in this really interconnected way. So they're actually talking about transportation and housing, transportation and land use, transportation and economic development, transportation and public health. And the thing about that that's different is that it's actually bringing different advocates to the table. So like all of a sudden, the Boston Chamber of Commerce is actually like, oh my gosh, people have to move really far away because they can't afford houses, and then how do they get to their jobs? We're like, truth, that is, yep, that's happening. But that's actually good because it means that there's an opportunity to actually build on the momentum that's been building these past few years and actually move towards some solutions. We're never going to like fix it because the changes keep happening, right? Like there's always innovations. But we can better meet the needs of people today and start to better plan for what we know the needs are going to be in the future. And I feel like we're actually in a moment where we can do that. So that's why it's really important that you're here.
One last comment, and then I think we're going to close.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for your presentation. That's great. I'd just like to ask if we could post these presentations, if you feel comfortable on the town website, if we share them.
The presentations will be posted, but I think it's on the Minuteman Network's website. The Minuteman Media Network. Is that right, Carlin? These are going to be posted. So this is being recorded, and the presentations will be available on the Minuteman Media Network website. Minuteman Media Network. Go back.
And also the slide presentations will be available on the League's website when they're posted shortly as well.
Sorry. And Minuteman Media Network does have a YouTube channel, and so it's there as well. It will be there as well.
So I think I want to close on this high note and say that, you know, when we started planning this forum, we thought that the subject of transportation mobility is big and complex. This was meant to be the first dialogue that we were hosting in town. We thank the town for letting us use their building. We thought we might have too many people to fit into the library where we oftentimes have these First Fridays. And I think we have heard a lot of comments, and I think this is the first of what may be several forums throughout the year sponsored by the League, talking about the problems and issues of mobility and transportation so that we can keep the momentum going and see what changes we can make happen, both at the local level, regional level, and state. So I thank you all for coming and for participating in this morning.